Let's talk law here on Radio 97. Our resident lawyer, Despina Prialo of boutique law firm Prialo Legal in Runaway Bay, with us every Thursday morning. She brings all of her years of legal expertise. She provides general advice on the latest hot topics. She's got, experience that spans more than 25 years in areas of property and commercial law. She also prepares wills as part of estate planning and litigation. So she's the lady to go to, and we always go to her every Thursday morning. Hi, Despina.
Hi, Wayne. Hi, Brooke.
Good morning, Desi. Good morning, Wayno. This one is in regards, our very first hot topic, it's a big one, is in regards to a recent article in the Gold Coast Bulletin. And it is all about a real estate agent allegedly, we will say this keyword, allegedly, doing the dirty. Telling some big lies.
No.
And it is just, it's so sad to read. So, Jasmina, can you walk us through this allegedly horrific kind of case? Just talk us through the details and what to look out for.
That's right. So I wasn't aware of this until I read the article posted in the Gold Coast Bulletin, which was done on the 22nd of March. And it talked about, they call it there, a leading Gold Coast realtor. So who will remain nameless for the purposes of our show this morning, of course. But if you can easily read the article and you'll know what I'm talking about when we mention it in a minute. So this particular agent apparently was putting pressure on a number of unit owners in old complexes. Okay, so in a body corporate in a strata in Queensland, we're talking about, but on the Gold Coast. And apparently he was going around putting pressure on the unit owners to sell. And the way he was doing that and the tactics apparently that he was using was to say to these unit owners that, well, the law now is that we only need 75% of the votes to be able to sell the entire complex to, say, a developer. And if you don't agree, then you'll just be forced to sell anyway because we only need 75%. Now,
that's wrong.
That's wrong. And that's the article that was posted. So if this did happen, that is appalling. And it is misleading and deceptive conduct. Now, obviously, I wasn't privy to and not aware and was not there at the time that he may have made these statements and used these pressuring tactics to all these owners. But if it did happen, it is absolutely wrong. And we do not have these laws in place at the moment in Queensland. So I want to use this story that was published recently to bring it home to listeners out there to really understand what is the current law again, what are we proposing? So what is the government proposing to change in the future, but it's not law now. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So what we have currently under the laws, the body corporate laws, is that you must have 100% of all owners in a complex agree to sell for the entire complex to then be bought out by a developer, say, and then to be knocked down, demolished and redeveloped. You can't do that unless you have 100% of votes from all unit owners. It is not a 75% situation at all in Queensland. So listeners need to understand first and foremost, that is the current law. Now, what we talked about a month ago, if you remember, we actually told the listeners about these body corporate law reforms. So when we talk about law reforms, in essence, put simply, we're talking about proposed changes to the law.
Possible
changes. Yeah. And when we talk about that, we talk about, well, what is the government considering at the moment to change from what we have to potentially something else? Mm-hmm. And when we talk about proposed law reforms, because it's always hitting the headlines, proposed law reforms, what does that mean? It means that the proposed changes to existing laws are being considered, but they're not changes in existence. And it is very rare, doesn't happen very often, that changes that we talk about that might be made, which then are made down the track, become retrospective. So in other words, they apply backwards. So say if a law came into place at the end of this year, it's pretty rare that that law then becomes retrospective where it applies, say, 12 months earlier or 2 years earlier. It can happen, but most commonly not. So we really want to be clear to listeners, if you're in a complex at the moment, and typically at the moment, the government's talking about these law reforms targeting older really old complexes, so not newer complexes, but it's under the guise of, well, we have some issues about maybe some of these older complexes really need to be, demolished and rebuilt. There's a lot of building defects and other issues. So it seems to be targeting those, like I said a month ago, but we're not sure yet because we haven't seen all the laws proposed. But if you're in a complex, typically a 3-story walk-up, so this particular one, I can mention the addresses. It talked about complexes which are 3-story walk-ups at 133 and 137 Old Burleigh Road, Broadbeach. And if listeners out there have been on the coast for a long time, they'll know where Old Burleigh Road is. So that's at Broadbeach. That's the street within which these complexes exist. And these ones, I know 137 Old Burleigh Road is a 3-story walk-up typically, right? Where you don't have any lifts. They were built a very long time ago. And in that complex, there are 12 lots, 12 units. And I wouldn't like to say all of them, but probably a lot of them are elderly people living there that have been living there for some time. And, for an agent to go and approach owners, if that's what he did, to say, look, hey, this is law now. This is the law. We don't need 100% of unit owners voting. I mean, that is absolutely misleading and deceptive conduct. You cannot do that if that's what this agent did. So if you're in these complexes, they're old, if you get approached, for example, by an agent in person, rings your doorbell, or you get a flyer in the mail, or some other notification, or you hear maybe from your neighbor, hey, guess what? I've been talking to this agent and this is what he or she said, okay? It is not law. So we want to get that message across.
All right. And you say at the moment it isn't law and it's perhaps on its way. Is it likely to become law, do you think?
Well, I'm not the legislator. I'm not the government. So I think it's likely that it's probably going to be changed, if I can say it that way, because it's on the table now for discussion. And these body corporate law reforms also included other things that we talked about a month ago, such as no prohibition on smoking, in balconies, where they can now have that prohibition, and dealing with other issues such as no ban on pets, and other issues we talked about a month ago. So I think because they've raised it, it's something that's been raised for discussion. Most likely there'll be changes, but as to what those changes look like, then we don't know. Yeah, that's what we don't know yet. But the most important thing to say is for listeners there, if you get approached and by anyone that says, well, we've all
the law now.
Yeah, we've all pretty much agreed. The fact that you don't agree and you're the only one in the complex, for example, that where you haven't agreed to sell, you're going to be forced. And we can push you out and we can force you because we want to sell, because we want to get paid out by a big developer, for example. So we're going to push you out. That's absolutely not the case. And it's not at the moment. So you do need 100% of the people there to actually vote on these matters. So really, really important for people to understand that that's the current law.
And you can understand too how that would be very stressful for people who've lived in those units. They're obviously older units, and perhaps people have been living there for many decades. And you can understand how someone who comes to the door and says this sort of thing, they could find that pretty confronting.
Very confronting. And agents and other parties in the profession, they are supposed to speak the truth, and they are supposed to not sway from that. And you can't have these pressuring tactics being used under any circumstances whatsoever. And I think the Real Estate Institute of Queensland made some comments about that as well, that, unit owners out there need to understand you don't have to be pressured. You shouldn't feel that way. It is not law. It's being considered. Now, as to the timing of this, who knows? I mean, when people start talking about reforms, it takes a very long time for those discussions to then turn into the reality of, well, we got bill draft number 1 and bill draft number 2, and you go through all of these motions to finally get to the end where you have an act that's passed with royal assent, and that's when it becomes law.
Yeah. And Despina, just quickly, for those vulnerable people that say can't navigate the internet very well and they panic and think, oh my gosh, what if this is now law and I didn't even know? Is there a website or a place, a government body that you would suggest people to call? Obviously, I know you're handy, which is great, but is there another possible, website or way to find out fairly quickly whether something has changed and they might not be aware?
Okay, so when it does become law, we will obviously let people know, and that's important. And there will be announcements all through different media publications. It's difficult to probably advise of a particular website, but probably the one that I'd go to is the Real Estate Institute of Queensland. Would be one of them. But certainly what I'd like to say is if you are out there listening and you've got something like this, some form of communication about, oh, well, we only need 75%. I'd really like to see that. And, you should reach out to me because that's really important to nip any of those pressuring tactics and potential misleading and deceptive conduct in the bud. And I would say that the CEO of the REIQ would want to know as well. So you might also want to reach out to the Real Estate Institute of Queensland. But certainly when we're getting close to anything looking like law, we'll let you know.
100%. Quickly, while we're on it, what is your phone number? Just while we discuss it.
Yep. So 55291 So if anybody has anything like that, please give me a call and we can have a chat.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you, Desi. And coming up next, parking fines in Queensland that you didn't even know exist and you're probably guilty of doing. I'm one of them. That's coming up in just a moment on Talking Law.
Are you confused about legal jargon? Do you need legal advice but don't know where to turn? Tune in to Talking Law with Despina Priala every Thursday morning at 8:30 on Radio 97. Despina, a leading lawyer with over 20 years of experience, will demystify the law and provide practical advice to help you navigate legal issues. Whether it's a family matter, a property dispute, or a business concern, Talking Law has got you covered. Don't miss out on this valuable resource. Tune in to Talking Law with Despina Priala every Thursday morning at 8:30 on Radio 97.